chapter 13 is on social psychology. Social psychology is about how other people influence us and our behavior. You can contrast this to personality psychology. Personality psychology asks about your individual traits, individual differences, and how those predict your behavior across different situations. And I would expect that if you're an introvert, according to a personality test, that you would act in quiet and reserved and sober ways across different social situations, in class, at the party, in the cafeteria, etc. But actually, personality tests are not as predictive as you might think. Okay? And in fact, people can act in ways that are quite different than what a personality test would predict, and what their values would predict, and what individual difference measures would predict. And I see this in my classrooms every day. I've given personality tests to students, and their personalities are quite different from each other. And I've given values tests, and their values are quite different from each other. Like, there's real variance in that. And yet when I stand up there at the podium and look out at a lecture hall, is everyone behaving differently? Are all those personality differences really playing out? Like, are the extroverts dancing on their desks? No, like, everyone, despite all these differences in personality and values, are acting in pretty much the same way. They're all sitting in their seat. They're all looking at me. They're all being quiet. They're all typing on their laptops or taking notes. The situation is actually often a much stronger, no thank you, cat, predictor of behavior. Okay? There's a social script. There are social expectations around the different roles that we in life. And there are expectations for how a student behaves that you've been socialized into understanding. You have, for 15 years of your life, been trained into this and taught this by your teachers, by your parents. You've been rewarded for following the expectations, and you've been punished for not following the expectations. So some of it's obedience. And it's also what everyone else is doing, and often that feels like the most comfortable thing to do. If you started doing something completely different, you might feel, when I do something like that, other people might, look at you strange and wonder why you're doing that weird thing. So for all these reasons that are fundamentally social, have this situation where people are all acting the same way despite these individual differences. And that is what social psychology is about, as distinct from, say, personality psychology. So social psychology studies how other people influence your behavior, how other people, groups, societies, influence your beliefs and your attitudes. And it's important because we are a social species. We survive not as individuals, but as members of groups. There are very, very few among us that would be able to, go out into the woods or the jungle and survive alone for any amount of time. And so group behavior is really important. It's really important for us to be a member of a group and to follow the norms of the group so that the other group members take care of us. Humans live in groups that are often competing with other groups. Our tribes, our nations compete with other tribes and nations. And there are reasons why we favor our own groups and disfavor, even demonize outgroup members. The way that we live now, today, is quite different from the ways that we evolved as a species. For most of human history, we've survived in small groups or tribes. And those groups couldn't get much bigger than, somebody has their microphone on. Thanks. Those groups didn't get much bigger than about 150. That's a limit. That's about as big as a Neolithic farming village could get. And the anthropologist named Dunbar has drawn a lot of parallels with this number. You know, that's about as many academics as you find working in a certain subdiscipline. It was about as large as a Roman battalion was before it would sort of break off. This seems to be like a kind of a limit for as much as we can cognitively take of having stable relationships with other people. And Dunbar thought that for a group of that size, like for 150, to actually stay cohesive, you have to spend about 40% of the group's time would be spent on what he called social grooming and taking care of the relationships. Now, you might wonder how big your networks are now. Probably a lot bigger than 150, because you have, what, like 1,000 Facebook friends? But those relationships are so distal. So the idea here is that we have a sort of cognitive limit on maintaining relationships with about 150 people. I've already mentioned that we are a social species and we live and survive in groups. Something that the textbook, I don't think, emphasizes, but is really important to obedience pressures, is that, like many social animals, we also have social hierarchies. And one reason that social hierarchies develop is limited access to resources. So the dominant members of the group, maybe they're bigger, maybe they're stronger, maybe might is right, or maybe they are selected into those roles because they have greater competence and people want them as leaders. Right? There are different reasons why certain individuals end up being dominant. One way or the other, the dominant individuals control access to resources. They control rewards and punishments, so they can get the other group members to comply. And subordinates comply for many different reasons. You know, could be conformity, could be because they really want to and they're into this. But a fundamental reason is that if they don't, the dominant individuals can restrict access to resources, take them away, or deny them, hurt them somehow. So we'll talk about certain different forces like conformity and obedience. Sometimes they can be kind of hard to disentangle. Conformity is when you do what the rest of the group is doing. So maybe an example could be if you wear a Halloween costume on Halloween because everyone else is. Nobody's making you do that. Obedience is when you are doing what an authority figure tells you, and that authority figure could reward or punish you. In practice, they're often pretty tangled up. So in many situations where there's really high conformity, there's also something going on with a power relationship as well. Our membership in groups is deeply important to us psychologically, right? We are hardwired to want to belong. And we will do even desperate things or things that seem foolish in order to belong and to maintain our position with our groups. And we'll even do cruel things to other people in order to maintain our position in a group, promote a position in a group, or promote the well-being of our own in-group. And a lot of human cruelty to other humans is underlain by that. Rejection from a group or from relationships really hurts us. If you look at research on happiness, well, let me ask you, what do you think the biggest predictors of happiness are? You want a happy life, right? Any ideas? It's Friday. Oh, am I cutting out? What I had asked is, what do you think are the biggest predictors of happiness? Annabelle says living like in alignment with values. Grace says accessible socialization. Sophie says family. Financial stability. Cats. Yes, there is research suggesting that petting cats makes people feel better. A lot of people pursue money. A lot of people try to be physically beautiful. A lot of people try to get attention for something and be famous. Liam says that people want different things in life. Yeah, people have different values, but can you live a life that's aligned with your values alone? If you value kindness, you need somebody to be kind to. If you value loyalty, you need somebody to be loyal to. If you value justice, you need people in a society who can practice justice. The biggest predictors of happiness are not things like wealth or money, right? They're not accomplishments. They're relationships. The biggest predictors of happiness are all things related to relationships, the top three. So things like the number of having a number of high quality relationships. So do you have a few friends in your life that you can rely on, a few family members that you have an intimate connection with? Another big one is having a long-term partner. But people often spend their time pursuing things like money and career success and education, etc., to the point that they actually damage their relationships. Now, they don't have time for their friends. They don't have time for their families. And so even in our large societies where your networks are so much bigger than 150, a lot of those people we're in relationships with, they can be kind of distal relationships, maybe not intimate relationships, not stable relationships, not like people who really care about you. Sometimes as people get older, they get more and more invested in their work roles as employees, to the point that when they retire, they may feel like they're facing a sudden crisis of loneliness, because all of a sudden, where are the colleagues? Where's the boss? What's the point of bleeding the company colors now? And in large industrialized societies, we now have a situation where more and more economic growth does not result in greater life satisfaction in the country anymore. Britain and Japan, those are both industrialized nations, have government ministers of loneliness, like a portfolio on loneliness. What are we going to do about this? Let's have social programs. Rejection hurts us a lot. And one way that people are punished for deviance is through rejection. Right? There's a timeout. You have to go be alone in your room. You can't be with the rest of the group. You can't be with the rest of the class. Think about the kind of language that people use when they're dealing with rejection. They might say, slapped in the face. I felt punched in the gut, stabbed in the back, sick to my stomach. They're often metaphors that are visceral and that relate the emotional feeling to a physical injury. And it so happens that social pain is processed in the same part of the brain as physical pain, called the anterior cingulate cortex. So the same part of your brain is getting activated when somebody actually punches you in the gut or, socially rejects you. And it feels bad, doesn't it? Like, could feel overwhelmingly bad, even though there's no physical injury. And because of the way we're wired like this, you can actually take Tylenol, ibuprofen, those over-the-counter medications that are meant to dull physical pain, opioids, whatever, and they also work on people's social rejection pain because they affect the same parts of the brain. There is a question in the chat. In general, after COVID, we have been struggling as a social species. I feel more disconnected socially sometimes since, but maybe it's more personal. That's a good question. There are different generations in society that are marked by different experiences. And I probably should have brought this up in the developmental psychology chapter. When you're studying a group longitudinally, those groups can be subject to generational effects. So let's say that I wanted to study mental health longitudinally, and I chose you guys as a cohort. Are you different as a generation because you went through the COVID restrictions during your formative years? I never went through anything like that when I was a teenager or a young adult. I did all my development before COVID. But you guys came of age during that time. And maybe it has affected you. I don't know. Liam says a lot of people feel lonely and isolated who didn't feel that way before as of the pandemic. It's possible. There is psychological research on the effects of the pandemic. I'm not very familiar with it. There's probably pros and cons. Zoom meetings certainly became, I mean, Zoom was on, people don't really talk about it before COVID, and now, you know, every meeting is Zoom meeting or hybrid, and there's pros and cons. There's less commuting. Maybe you can spend more time with your family instead of sitting in traffic. We do know that humans need socialization for their development. Children who don't get enough social contact, like who are in abusive situations and are deprived of social contact, don't develop normal intelligence. They would be left with lasting mental health issues. So in this chapter, you'll learn about some different social influences like obedience and conformity. These pressures have developed in humans over eons. They're essentially selected for because they're often adaptive. A lot of even our cognitive biases that can get us in trouble, that can be wrong, are big picture, often adaptive. And that's why we have them. But there are certain contexts in which they can be maladaptive. So I don't think of obedience as good or bad. I don't think of rebellion as good or bad. There are contexts in which obedience or conformity are adaptive, and situations, contexts in which they are maladaptive. Here's an example of obedience being adaptive. You obey the rules of the road. There are laws that say you have to stop at a stop sign, that you stop at a red light, and that the green means go. And you obey those when you drive your car, and you hope that other drivers do. The rules of the road are reasonable and sound and adaptive. And if we didn't have them, things would be a lot worse, right? If everyone did whatever they wanted. That's what it's like in Haiti. Lots of motor vehicle accidents. But then there are situations where obedience could be destructive. Can you think of any? When could obedience be maladaptive? So Liam suggests following rules that are not made with your best interest in mind. Maybe there's examples in your life where you followed a rule and that rule was not there to sort of benefit you. There's a difference between rules and expectations. Like there are laws where you will actually be punished if you break the law. There are rules, and if you're a member of a school, like maybe there's a workplace code of conduct or a student code of conduct, and you get in trouble if you violate that. And that's not quite the same thing as conformity, which is more about expectations. I think there's a strong expectation that if you're a patient, that you follow doctor's orders. Have you ever been misdiagnosed and dutifully took some prescription and got sick doing that? That can happen. Grace suggests following a tyrant and causing mass destruction in the process. Right? Followers of Donald Trump stormed the Capitol. They got themselves in some trouble. If this were 1938, most of us would probably be Nazis. Michael asked, could obedience be kind of related to peer pressure? No. Well, yes and no. Peer pressure is about conformity. So conformity is about complying with the norms of the group. There might be a group pressure to do something. If you wear red and green sweaters for Christmas and you're doing what other people in your group are doing, it's like a horizontal social influence. That's different from obedience, which is when an authority figure tells you to do something. Your textbook doesn't mention power when they talk about authority figures. Well, we'll talk about the Milgram experiments this chapter. This cat is really distracting me. And in the Milgram experiments, the researcher took the role of an authority figure, so somebody that had high status and talked about, you must do this and you must do that and the experiment must continue, but actually didn't have real power over the person in the experiment who was the subject of the experiment. Phoenix said that cults rely on maladaptive conformity and obedience to function. True, and people can do really messed up things in cults. Facian says, in some third world countries, disobeying some religious rule, if you disobey a religious rule, you will be punished by leaders. So that's more than conformity, that's obedience. And so there are situations when, be it conformity or obedience, are adaptive. Let's say that your family traditions really make you happy. Maybe that's a good thing. So maybe conformity can be good. Holds the group together, gives it an identity, some way of expressing your belonging. But then sometimes groups do foolish things. Sometimes we have bad leaders, and there could be consequences of conformity or obeying. Your textbook says each social influence should be evaluated critically. That is not reasonable. You would not get through your day if every day you got up in the morning and you started critically evaluating every single social influence on you. Critical thinking involves a lot of mental horsepower. And it's a great idea to think critically about big decisions and big lifestyle factors, but I don't think it's rational or reasonable to expect that you do it over every social influence. But sure, maybe take a moment to think about your friend group and how they influence you and whether that's a good thing or not, whether that's the way you want to live your life. We negotiate our identities through comparison with others. We might compare ourselves against people with lower social status. That's like a downward social comparison. Maybe that makes you feel better about yourself. It can also make you kind of arrogant and contemptuous. Sometimes we compare ourselves upward. We often try to imitate people who we see as social superiors. So if there's some celebrity that we admire, some rich and famous person, the royal family, whoever it is that you admire, celebrities, pop stars, I don't know, you might try to act and dress like them. The textbook suggests that both can boost our self-concept. I don't love that because I think there's a solid body of research that shows that insofar as self-esteem goes, right, which is self-worth, which is what they're really talking about, self-concept is just whatever you think of yourself. your self-concept might involve that you are a student with certain kinds of values, with certain goals and certain social position, membership in family. That's self-concept. What they're really getting at here about boosting isn't self-concept. How do you boost your self-concept? It doesn't make sense. They mean self-worth or self-esteem. And what research shows is that the pursuit of self-esteem is maladaptive. All the things that we do to try to increase our self-esteem, like trying to be more beautiful, trying to be more accomplished, trying to be more socially accepted, generally seem to backfire. Let's say that you believed that you made your self-worth conditional on your beauty. A lot of young women do that. There's social that get people to think in that way. Well, now you're always going to be looking in the mirror, and you're going to be finding things you don't like, and maybe you have to nip this and tuck that, and buy some more clothes and buy some lipstick and go to the hairdresser. And every time you're in a picture, you're going to be scrutinizing it and be like, oh no, I need a filter for this. And it doesn't really matter how many likes you get, how much shopping you do, how much plastic surgery you get. It's never going to be enough. There's always going to be a hole that isn't filled. And so you see people getting like more and more plastic surgery, wearing more and more makeup and more eyelashes until they start even looking kind of silly. The same thing goes for accomplishments. People start being workaholics. They chase the prizes and the titles and the higher salaries, and they earn more and more money, and they're still not satisfied. It's never enough. What research suggests is that we all do best when we have unconditional self-worth. That means that you decide now that you have worth here now, that it doesn't depend on you getting a certain grade or getting a certain girlfriend or boyfriend or getting a certain job or having so many friends or being popular or anything at all. If you had secure self-worth, your self-esteem would be the same whether you achieved all those things or got fired and got dumped and got sent to jail, etc. That's what it would mean to have self-worth. And there are a lot of religions suggest that as well. Like there's philosophies and religions that suggest that people's worth should be ultimately unconditional on what they do. This cat. Other people's beliefs and behaviors can be contagious. Like when we mimic other people's behaviors. I mean, here's an example of social contagion is yawning. When someone else yawns, what do? All of a sudden you want to yawn. Actually, just talking about yawning kind of makes me want to yawn. And does anyone know like why we might do that? Why we would have that phenomenon? How could yawns be contagious? Why might they be? How could that be adaptive? People have speculated about this. Maybe yawning wakes you up a bit because you breathe in this kind of bolus of cold, fresh air. Maybe if the group's all kind of nodding off, that helps everyone become more alert, and that helps protect you from a saber-toothed tiger. So other people's behaviors can be contagious. That's an example. Catch yawning. Yawning is behavior. But this also applies to psychological things like beliefs. We often just uncritically accept things other people say is true. And then that affects the way we perceive the world. If you're in a social group, other people can kind of reinforce that belief. The textbook talks about how once upon a time, a pilot noticed some strange, looked like some strange objects. And he described them as flying sausages. But they got reported in the media, not as sort of sausages, but as saucers. And now there's a whole kind of social trope about flying saucers and little green men. And when people have experiences that are probably related to some of the things that happen to us when we are falling asleep, like the sense of floating, there's a whole narrative trope about being kind of lifted up into a flying saucer, and people's experiences seem to conform to this, right, to some social narrative. There are urban legends that are a bit silly that people believe. There are cases of mass delusions and mass hysteria. Now think about like witch burnings in the early modern period. All these people were seeing that witch hex people and cast spells. You know, they had all kinds of witnesses at those trials. People believed this, and it's nonsense. Maybe in your own life, you've seen examples of mass foolishness. When I was about, I think, when I was in junior high, people actually believed. It sounds ridiculous to tell you this now because it's just so silly. A lot of people believed that these Beanie Babies that were produced by a company called TY, I don't know if you call it TY or Ty, were of some kind of exceptional value because, well, when they first started selling them, maybe they were underpriced and people really liked them, and you could sell them for more on the aftermarket. So you could buy it for X price, or maybe get it with a Happy Meal for X price, and then go sell it on eBay for more. And people would start bidding up the prices of these to the point that they got really overvalued. And I remember that people would collect these little bears, which are really just, I mean, it's polyester, velour, it's full of plastic PVC beans. They're made in a factory. Like, how could this be like a precious object that you retire on? People like believe this. My friend was convinced that because she had a certain star-spangled beanie bear, you know, by 2020 it'd be worth like $25,000. And my friends would keep these bears with, like, they wouldn't even cuddle the bear, which they were too old for anyway, but they'd put like tag protectors on them so that the paper tag didn't get damaged. And they would put them in these like glass cases, like they were an object of extreme value. And now I'm sure you've seen tons of these at like flea markets and yard sales, like 25 cents each. Phoenix says, I saw an interesting video essay that suggests that the way pop psychology talks about NPD, that's narcissistic personality disorder, could be a form of mass hysteria. Interesting. There are different terms here. Mass hysteria, I think, refers to people doing like really irrational things. And that's different from a collective delusion where everyone believes something that isn't true. For it to qualify as mass hysteria, they really have to do things that are irrational, like go burn witches. There was, in the 1980s, there was a satanic panic in the United States. There was this idea that maybe preschools were doing satanic ritual abuse on kids, and there were actually like trials where people went to jail. So mass hysteria pushes a collective delusion over the edge. There's social psychologists have studied certain phenomena, and they have, through their research, found that certain phenomena are replicable and reliable. And one of the most famous among these is the fundamental attribution error. And it has to do with the way we attribute responsibility to other people and especially to ourselves. Humans have a lot of self-serving biases that keep our self-esteem up, that maintain our value with the group. We have a tendency when things go well to take personal credit for it. If something goes well, it's because I'm so smart and I'm so nice and I'm so great. But what about when things go badly? Well, then I am likely to say that it's actually, it was COVID, the economy, it's my terrible boss, it's my awful colleagues, it's my family, it's the environment. When things go wrong for us, we're likely to see and understand the effects of the environment. And honestly speaking, situational pressures can be very, very strong, and they can even overwhelm personal factors. So it's not unreasonable. However, when it comes to other people, we tend to really overestimate the role of dispositional influences. So if somebody else does something bad, gets in an accident, it's because they were lazy. It's because they were irresponsible. It is because of something to do with their personality. So we underplay the role of the situation considerably when we're thinking about other people's behavior. We make it about their personal attributes and underplay the role of the situation. We're much less likely to do that to ourselves. And, maybe it's because we have first experience of all those environmental factors. And maybe it's because we have a bit of a self-serving bias as well. But this phenomenon in psychology is so strong that there have been experiments where research subjects are supposed to make attributions about somebody's behavior. And they're even told that this is an experimental setup and people are, randomly assigned to certain roles and they're following a certain script. Even knowing that, they still have a tendency to attribute people's behavior to the personal factors. We're particularly likely to do this in the West, in an individualistic culture. People from collectivistic cultures are actually a bit less prone to this error and a bit more likely to understand or empathize with the pressures of the environment. Two major subjects in social psychology are conformity and obedience. Conformity is our tendency to alter our behavior as a result of actual or perceived pressure from a group. This is about horizontal influence. It's about from peers. It's not about following the leader who might punish you. It's not about an authority figure. It's about going along with everyone else. And conformity pressures are quite strong. There was, your textbook mentions an American TV show, is it Candid Camera, where they had people in an elevator who were all like Confederates. They were part of the film crew, standing facing like the wrong way in an elevator. Like at a certain time, we're all gonna turn around and face the back of the elevator. And there's a person there who's just like a stranger member of the public that's actually riding the elevator. And what do? Well, very often they do what everyone else does and turn to face the back of the elevator. That's an example of conformity. Nobody made them do that. And there are reasonable reasons for conforming. We do what other people do because they might know something. Like there are informational social influences. Oftentimes when I get off a plane, I'm in an airport somewhere, I'm not the kind of person that's very spatially intelligent or good at reading signs, so I could get lost, but I just follow the other people who look like they confidently know where they're going, and that seems to work. That's an example of conformity. If somebody else were to like look in a certain direction, all of a sudden, you're likely to also turn your head and look in that direction. And maybe it's because something is going on there. Okay, there could be good reasons for this. Solomon Asch did a very famous set of experiments in the 1950s on conformity. Now let's start with a pretty easy task here. Here's the standard line. And in this study of perception, you just have to tell me which of the comparison lines matches the standard line. How hard is that? Okay, that's not too hard. But what if I asked you this question in a group setting and you were the fifth person to answer, and the first person says, well, it's line 3. Second person says line 3. Third person says line 3. How are you feeling? Are you going to say it's line 2? Or are you going to start questioning yourself? Because all these other people might know something you don't, like maybe there's something wrong with your glasses. So a surprisingly high proportion of people in this situation will say that it's the wrong line, and they'll go along with what the other people said. Now, they're not likely to do that if you ask them to write down their answer. There's something about speaking in front of a group. There's some pressure to conform. And there were various variations of this experiment where they tried, okay, well, what if there's like 10 people who say it's the wrong line? What if it's 3 people? Does it make a difference? Well, the max pressure can top at around 5. What if we include somebody else in the group that disagrees? And maybe they don't say that it's line 2, they say it's line 1. Oh, but when you have someone else there that disagrees, suddenly it makes it a lot easier for the subject to say what they think. And maybe you've had experiences like that in your life where you really wanted to say something, but you don't know if you can, you don't know if you should, you feel really uncomfortable, and then someone else advances a differing opinion, and all of a sudden you might feel relieved. Like all of a sudden now it's okay for you to say it. And if you're the kind of person that's a bit, I don't know, maybe disagreeable and a bit of a skeptic, you might have experiences in your life where people have come up to you and said, wow, thank you for saying that, because I thought that too, but I couldn't say it because of conformity pressures. People who have low self-esteem are a little bit more likely to conform. And maybe that's because they have more trust in the group and they feel safer going along. There are some cultures that are more collectivistic, and in more collectivistic cultures where the interest of the group is put ahead of the interest of the individual, people are more likely to conform. Again, conformity isn't like good or bad. There's no trait or behavior that's good or bad. It's adaptive or maladaptive in a certain context. We are at 12:20 now, and we'll talk about obedience next time.